There is a locked building on a property that most people have only seen in photographs. For 17 years, nobody went inside. No press, no cameras, no family members, nobody. Just silence and whatever was left behind the last time the door closed. And when it finally opened, the people who walked in weren't prepared for what they found. Not because it was shocking in the way that headlines are shocking, but because it felt deeply, quietly human. This is the story of what was hidden inside Michael Jackson's secret warehouse at Neverland Ranch, and why it took 17 years for anyone to talk about it. To understand why any of this matters, you have to go back to 1988, when a 29-year-old Michael Jackson bought a 2,700-acre property in the Santa Ynez Valley in California, and started turning it into something the world had never seen before. He didn't want a mansion, he didn't want a retreat, he wanted a world. His own world, built from scratch, where the rules of ordinary life didn't apply. Over the years, Neverland became exactly that. There was a private railway that ran through the grounds. There was a full amusement park with rides that Michael could operate in the middle of the night if he felt like it. There was a zoo, a movie theater that could seat over 50 people, and manicured gardens that took an entire team of staff to maintain. The main house was less a home and more a carefully constructed statement about who Michael Jackson believed himself to be. The entrance foyer alone was filled with commissioned paintings depicting Michael in fantastical settings. There was a marble clock so heavy the floors beneath it had to be structurally reinforced just to hold the weight. But the parts of Neverland that nobody ever photographed were just as important as the parts everybody saw. Because a place like this doesn't run on magic, it runs on logistics. Behind every ride was a maintenance building. Behind every garden was a storage facility. Behind every carefully crafted guest experience was an invisible infrastructure of equipment, spare parts, and operational machinery that kept the illusion alive. One section of the property in particular was different from the rest. A personal garage and an adjacent warehouse that Michael had designed himself, built to his own specifications. Nobody on staff went in without a reason. It wasn't discussed, it was simply there, locked, belonging entirely to Michael. When Michael Jackson died on June 25, 2009, Neverland went completely still. The ride stopped running, the staff left. The animals were relocated. The property, which had cost tens of millions of dollars a year just to maintain, was suddenly standing empty with no clear plan for what came next. And that garage, that warehouse Michael had built for himself, stayed exactly as it was, sealed, untouched, as if the person who was supposed to come back and open it simply never did. For 17 years, it stayed that way. Fans speculated. Journalists wrote about it. Estate representatives gave careful non-answers whenever anyone asked. The property changed hands legally more than once, passed through financial restructuring, almost went to auction, and still that one corner of Neverland remained closed. There was something almost deliberate about it, as if opening it would mean something that nobody was ready to face yet. Then in 2024, everything shifted. A film crew arrived at Neverland to shoot scenes for a major Michael Jackson biopic. For the first time in years, the gates opened in a serious way, and as part of preparing the property for filming, certain areas that had been closed for nearly 2 decades were finally accessed, including that warehouse, including that garage. What they found inside wasn't what most people were imagining. There were no dark secrets, no hidden documents that changed the narrative. What there was instead was something more quietly devastating. It looked exactly like the last day Michael had been there. Nothing dramatic, nothing staged. Just a man's private life, preserved in amber, waiting in the dark. The cars were the first thing that got people talking. Several Rolls-Royces, kept in near-perfect condition, covered and untouched. Not a flashy collection, not a showroom. More like objects that had been meaningful at a specific moment in someone's life, and then carefully set aside. People who were there described the feeling as less like entering a garage, and more like stepping into a chapter of a book that had never been finished. But the cars were almost beside the point once people started looking at everything else. There were personal notebooks, private planning documents, handwritten notes in Michael's own handwriting from different periods of his life. And then there was something that stopped everyone in the room. A tour itinerary from 1979, when Michael was 21 years old, with a mission statement written at the top in his own hand. It said, "MJ will be my new name. No more Michael Jackson. I want a whole new character, a whole new look. I should be a totally different person." He had written out, before most of the world even knew who he was going to become, exactly the transformation he intended to make. And then he made it. There were also physical objects that carried a specific kind of weight. A pair of shoes, a pair of socks, the ones he wore on March 25th, 1983, the night he performed Billie Jean on the Motown 25 television special and introduced the moonwalk to the world. He talked about that performance for the rest of his life. He said afterward that he hadn't stayed on his toes long enough during the spin, that he had wanted to hold the moment longer. Nobody in the audience would have noticed. But he knew, he always knew, and he kept the shoes. There were also gifts, children's drawings, and personal mementos from people who had meant something to him. A diorama that had been custom-built for him by Disney. A gift from Elizabeth Taylor with a note that simply read, "MJ Love E.T." For a man whose public life had become so dominated by speculation and legal battles, the warehouse offered something almost no one had access to. Evidence of what he actually cared about when no one was watching. Everyone who knew Michael personally says the same thing when they try to explain the children's items, the toys, the childlike world he built at Neverland. They say he wasn't performing innocence. He was searching for it. He had been a working professional musician since he was 6 years old. By the time he was 10, he was performing sold-out shows. The childhood that most people take for granted simply never happened for him. Neverland was his attempt to go back and find it. The warehouse was where the most personal pieces of that search had been quietly stored away. But the warehouse was only one part of what Michael left behind. When he died, he had approximately $500 million in debt. That number sounds impossible for someone who had been one of the best-selling artists in the history of recorded music. But Michael had never stopped spending at the level he was spending in the 1980s. Even as income from touring and endorsements dropped sharply after the first allegations emerged in 1993. He never toured in the United States again after that year, and the cost of maintaining Neverland alone was staggering year after year. The estate's executors had to move immediately, managing creditors, legal challenges from family members, and the fundamental question of whether the assets left behind were enough to build something sustainable. The answer was yes, but only because of a decision Michael had made nearly 25 years earlier that most people at the time thought was reckless. In 1985, he purchased the ATV Music Publishing catalog for $47.5 million. That catalog contained the publishing rights to a significant portion of the Beatles' songwriting library, among thousands of other songs. Paul McCartney had encouraged Michael to invest in music publishing in the first place, then tried and failed to buy this very catalog himself. Michael merged it with Sony's publishing division to create Sony ATV Music Publishing, one of the most valuable music publishing companies in the world. His estate retained a 50% ownership stake, estimated today to be worth approximately $1 billion. That single purchase turned into the most important financial asset the estate had. When the debt crisis hit, the estate negotiated a deal with Sony worth a reported $250 million, described at the time as the largest record deal in history. Without that catalog, without that purchase, everyone called strange back in 1985, the entire legacy would have been dismantled by creditors within years of his death. The cultural recovery was just as unexpected. The concert film This Is It, assembled from rehearsal footage of the tour Michael never got to perform, earned over $300 million at the box office worldwide. It showed him at rehearsal, still at the absolute peak of his abilities just weeks before he died. The conversation shifted away from tabloid narratives and back toward the music and the craft. Streaming numbers surged, his biggest songs returned to radio. For a new generation of listeners, Thriller and Billie Jean existed simply as timeless pop. completely separate from the controversies that had surrounded him. In just 4 years after his death, his estate earned over $600 million, more than most living artists earn in a full decade. Neverland still stands empty. The rides no longer run, the railway sits still. But it isn't really abandoned, because abandoned implies something forgotten, and Neverland has not been forgotten. The warehouse and garage, now opened after 17 years of silence, don't resolve the complicated questions about who Michael Jackson was. What they do is add texture. A 21-year-old writing his own reinvention in a notebook. A pair of shoes kept from the most important performance of his career. A gift from a friend tucked away where nobody would see it. Michael Jackson died in June 2009. He had been famous for over 40 years. His story is enormous, complicated, and genuinely unresolved in ways that most celebrity stories are not. But that warehouse offers a reminder that underneath all of it, the spectacle, the lawsuits, the record deals, the reinventions, there was a person, someone who kept the shoes, someone who saved the notebooks, someone who held on to a gift from a friend and put it somewhere private, somewhere no one else would find it. 17 years later, someone finally did. What do you think that says about his legacy? Leave it in the comments. I read them. If this video was worth your time, the like button is right there, and it genuinely makes a difference. Subscribe for more videos like this, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you soon.